Okay. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for the Employment Authorization Document Briefing. With us, this is a shared presentation with CDLS Washington and CFSU in Colorado Springs. So from the Canadian Defense Liaison Staff in Washington, D.C., we have Lieutenant Colonel McClure and the DCO Major Croft. From the Canadian Forces Support Unit in Colorado Springs, we have the CO, Lieutenant Colonel Ed Malau. Presenting today is Misty Baker. She's the EAD coordinator for Canadian Element NORAD personnel. And Mike Bégin from Washington is the EAD coordinator, and although he's not presenting, questions can be asked to him as well. Finally, I would like to introduce our Chief of Staff for the Canadian Element NORAD, Colonel Tremblay, and the Chief Warrant Officer McCarran, who's the Canadian Element NORAD Chief. And I believe they will say a few words before we get started.
Yeah, thank you, Misty, and thank you everyone for being here today. The employment authorization document process, as you will see through the slide deck, there's actually 22 slides. It's complicated, okay? It's not easy. It's not something we have a control over, but we have to deal with it. So you will see that this presentation, it's quite detailed, and it does address like every step of the process. And the reason for that is that the only thing we can really do that we can 100% control, it's what we put on the form before sending it to the proper authorities. And this is crucial because when we send forms that have like some mistakes and some errors, it might take a while. It might take up to 3 months before the system actually get back to you and advise you that you made a mistake. And during that time, the processing is on hold. So it's really important that we pay attention to what our SMEs are going to tell us today. And I would like to also see that we acknowledge the fact that this does create frustration. Okay, we realize that being able to be employed within the United States, it's something quite important for our spouses. And when there's glitch in the system, when we are put on hold, that create obviously frustration, and that does impact the families directly. So again, thank you for being here today. This is a chance for you to ask all the questions that you have. It's going to be about a 30-minute presentation followed by 60 minutes Q&As, but really we're going to stay online until all the answers are answers to our best of our abilities. And please feel free also if you have any concern, we're going to take note. We're going to do our best to address those via the chain of command. But again, there's an expectation management that is important because, as you know, we are guests in the United States and we have to follow the proper process as per any other citizens in the U.S. Chief, do you have anything else to add?
Just that we all acknowledge that this is a frustration and a dissatisfier for the families, but part of what we're doing today is to provide information. And if there are questions, make sure you're asking those questions. But we'll also be available after to continue to answer those questions and be available.
Thank you, Chief. Paulo?
No, nothing from me. So over to you, DCO and Misty.
Thanks, sir. Just a couple of ground rules before we get started. So recognizing that this is an emotional topic, when you do ask questions, please be professional and respectful. You are able to post your questions in the chat and I can read them out afterwards to have them answered, or you can use the raise your hand feature to pose the question yourself. General questions are welcomed. Please keep any details of personal cases or situations and discuss that with Mike or Misty afterwards. And we are recording this presentation and we'll aim to make it available afterwards. Misty, over to you.
Hi everyone, Misty Baker. I have been working with the Canadian Forces Support Unit for about 14 years now. This presentation is very detailed. I will not go through every single line of every slide. I will try to hit on the main points. Mike in CDLS Washington, he may do his things a little bit different than the way I do mine. So, and he might, have a few things to say during this presentation as well. I will start with slide 1. I just want to say When I say that it's important to contact me before sending me any employment authorization document applications, there is a reason behind that. There are certain aspects, certain things that I have to do for the Department of State that could cause a delay if I wait until after you send me your application. So I'll ask for additional information, like passport numbers, phone numbers, emails, a bunch of information that I have to input into a government system that will produce identification numbers for the member and the dependents when an EAD, to let the Department of State know an EAD application is coming. So if I do that ahead of time, then that just allows the application to go a little bit quicker whenever I do send it off. Next slide. So working in the United States, spouses and dependents need an employment authorization document to work. They need a U.S. Social Security card to work. You can look for employment, you can accept employment, you just cannot physically work until you have those two documents in your hand. Next slide. So, what documents do I need to obtain in order to legally work? An EAD and a Social Security card. You do not need a Social Security card to get a driver's license. You don't need one to get a bank account. There are many things that you can do without a Social Security card. There's just steps that you have to take. This slide tells you what you need to do. If you are living in the United States and working for a foreign company, yes, you need an EAD. Even if they are paying you in foreign dollars to a foreign account, you still need an EAD unless you are working for the Canadian government. Then you do not need an EAD. Next slide. That is a picture of an EAD and what a Social Security number card looks like. Next slide. So the basic process. Once I receive the application, I send it to the Office of Foreign Missions. They need their time to look at it. Once they have done what they need to do, they will then send that application to the United States Citizenship and Immigration Service, who will do what they need to do. And it normally takes about 14 to 16 weeks for the entire process to take place. Next slide. Processing time, 14 to 16 weeks. I am not able to check on the status of your EAD application until it has been gone from me for 14 weeks. So the Office of Foreign Missions is very specific when they say this. They will not allow me to check the application. I have no control over the processing time. I am not able to expedite this service because the service is not expeditable. They will not allow me to do such. Okay, next slide. Tax obligations. So the Canadian Forces, we cannot give tax advice. I would suggest hiring a tax attorney if your situation is complicated. This slide will tell you exactly what you need to do and exactly what documents you'll need to get for your EAD renewal. Please be aware that the IRS can take a considerable amount of time getting you the documents that you need. So my suggestion would be to apply early, very early, for any tax documents.
Misty, can I make a comment?
Go ahead.
Like here, Also, the Office of Foreign Missions will not provide tax advice either. So really, you're on your own with regard to taxes. But it's also very important that you ensure you use the right tax forms when you do apply for taxes, because we're seeing rejections now because this applies to renewals, because the wrong tax form may have been used, and the result is that you have to go and reapply for your taxes, which will significantly delay the submission of your renewal application. So taxes are very important. Don't ignore them. If you do, and if you're looking for a renewal, it'll definitely delay the submission.
Okay, next slide. So this is the checklist of everything that you will need to send to me, even for renewals, everything. Basically, I know, I will get asked, well, I sent you all of these things when I first applied for my EAD. Now I'm doing a renewal. Why do I need to send those same documents? Because the Office of Foreign Missions and the United States Citizenship and Immigration Service require it. Okay, next slide. One very important thing, when you are signing or completing your applications, use black ink only. If they receive it in blue ink, they will reject it. We're not allowed to, I don't really know why blue ink is not accepted. I can only say black ink only. And when I say here, all uppercase letters, that is specific to the way I like to have things done. If you do them in lowercase letters, will it be accepted? Absolutely, it will be. I just find it easier to read if it's in all uppercase. The next few slides take you step by step on how to complete your I-765. Next slide.
Can I also add, I would recommend that people not handwrite, not fill in the form by hand. Actually go online and complete the form this way, that way, because this way it'll eliminate possible errors and so on. It's much easier to read as well. Anything that will delay your application, and one way to do so is by doing it online, and it's an important step in the process.
Okay, next slide. Next slide. So one important thing, if you have ever had an EAD, even if it was 20 years ago, you are still going to be applying for a renewal. Next slide. How to complete your I-566. This is a step-by-step instructions on how to do that. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Looking up your I-94 history. This slide tells you exactly how to do that. Next slide. What to look for on your I-94. This is very important because if your I-94 has a mistake in it, it will have to be corrected before you can apply for your EAD or a renewal. Next slide. EAD photo requirements. Specifications are listed on this slide. If photos are received of the incorrect size, they will have to be redone. And please do not send any photos to me that have not already been cut. Next slide.
Can I just add about pictures? The number one reason we see rejections is because of issues with the quality of the pictures. sometimes they're too light, sometimes they're shadowing and so on. And it's a very subjective call. They may look fine to you, they may look fine to me, but they get rejected by OFM. And it's not like, the submission goes next week and we get them back the following week. It could be 2 months before they come back to us. So if the picture quality is not fine, and we had one case where it was rejected twice, and that submission was initially submitted in January, and that person still has not got his EAD yet. So picture quality is very important. Don't overlook it, please.
Okay, requested document copies. So I know that people will be inclined to use their cell phone to take a photocopy of their documents and try and scan it over to me. If at all possible, please do not do that, because those documents are going to government departments as part of an official record. So if you absolutely must do that, there is an application that you can use called Cam Scanner that will help flatten that photo. Next slide. Marriage certificate.
Misty, it's the CEO here. Can you clarify, if you find mistakes on your I-94, how does it get corrected?
So for here in Colorado Springs, I have a contact that I use that helps me correct them. Ordinarily, you would need to go see your Customs and Border Protection officer at your local airport.
So they're called the deferred inspection sites. So typically what happens when there's an error on the I-94, it could be that a B2 visa has been assigned, which is basically a tourist visa, or rather than duration of status, D/S, there's a date there, which means there's a problem with the I-94. So really the onus is upon the member to go to the deferred inspection site to have it corrected. And it's not a difficult thing to do. As Misty says, it's just a matter of going typically to a major airport. There is a listing of deferred inspection sites that can be provided. And it's really, you walk in, they'll reissue the I-94, and at that point, you'll be good to go.
Thanks, Misty.
Okay, I do it, for Colorado Springs personnel as a favor, but the airport, yes. Marriage certificate, a record of solemnization of your marriage is not a marriage certificate. So if you don't have your marriage certificate, you will need to apply for one. And if it is not in English, you will need to have that translated. And translation, you can easily do that yourself on a separate document. Just type in like the French word, and beside it, put the English word. You don't have to go out of your way to have someone translate it. Next slide. Questions or concerns? I think we're about ready for that right now. DCO?
It's the CEO here. Sorry, Suzanne, before you pick things up, I just want people to understand that this town hall was initiated by General Pelletier in discussion with Major General Ormsby in CDLS Washington. So General Ormsby is the commander of CDLS Washington. He's also the Canadian Defense Attaché. So he understands the complications of trying to reach into US government departments to try and influence how they process. So what Misty didn't mention is that OFM has specifically told her on emails that they're dealing with about 100,000, correct me if I'm wrong, Misty, about 100,000 applications for EAD. So that tells you just how high the volume is. And so if things don't get done correctly the first time around, you're looking at a significant delay in processing. So that's why the Chief of Staff led off by saying, this is the one area that we can control. And so it's really important that if you have any questions or concerns and you need answers, contact Misty or Mike, or use this presentation, which will be made available to make sure that the applications are correctly filled out. I can't stress that enough, because that's a lot of where the frustration comes in, applications being rejected. and then that just adds to the delay. So that's my piece. Back to you, Misty, and the DCO.
If you read the slideshow carefully, slide by slide, probably 99% of your questions can be answered in this slideshow. Just make sure you really read it carefully.
So there's a couple of questions coming up in the chat. Some of the questions have already been answered, but just for anybody who doesn't have access to the chat, just to clarify, Mike Bégin is processing EADs for CDLS Washington folks, and Misty Baker processes EADs for CanAlum NORAD. So direct your questions appropriately to those personnel. The first question that I haven't answered on chat yet is actually from Mike, and it's, is CDLS Washington reviewing renewal packages before forwarding to State Department to ensure the proper tax forms and other paperwork is provided?
So yes, we always take a look at the EAD submissions to make sure that everything is correct, appropriate. The issue, the recent rejection that we had for an EAD involved an A1 visa holder. So this doesn't apply to NATO 2 visa holders. A1 visa holders are CAF members that are assigned to the Canadian Embassy. And it had to do with the tax form that person used, the dependent spouse, in support of her submission. So what result? This wouldn't be an issue so much for NATO 2 visa holders typically, but so what the person had to do is reapply, redo her tax submissions for the last 3 years. And of course, that creates a big challenge because it just further delays the issuance of an EAD. The other issue is that often for EAD submissions, you need to provide state tax returns as well. So not just at the federal level, but the state level as well. So renewals are particularly complicated for that reason. You would think they'd be simpler, but they're not. The tax requirement makes an EAD submission much more complicated, and they will quickly be rejected if they don't, if the proper documentation is not provided, tax documentation that is.
And I do look over every single application that comes to me, and if there is something wrong, I will not even send it to the Office of Foreign Missions. I will go back to the dependent and tell them what needs to happen, and then we go from there. But I do not send them in until they've been correct.
Next question for somebody that's posted to Tampa in December 2021. Can their spouse start the EAD process prior to their arrival once they've confirmed their home address?
It's not possible. No, yeah, correct.
Go ahead, Mike.
It's not possible to move forward with an EAD application until the member and family dependents are in the U.S. because you need to include such things as I-94s, which won't be validated until you cross the border. So typically you need to, and you have to be a resident of the U.S. for that matter as well. And you have to have a residence. So if, you know, you can perhaps jumpstart the paperwork to some degree, but it certainly can't be submitted until you're actually here in the States. And we'll also, as Misty pointed out earlier, we need to do a notification of appointment as well to generate your PIDs. So you're not really going to gain a whole bunch of time by starting early, to be honest.
Thank you. There was a question about having a job offer letter to start the process. Clarifying, is this only for dependents age 14 or 15 or everybody? You can answer that one.
So the job offer letter is for those under the age of 16 who are trying to get an EAD.
So between the ages of 12 to 16, you require a job offer?
Yes.
Thank you. There's a question about EAD renewals and starting the application process 6 months prior to the expiration. Can you just talk about the timelines for renewals, because there's a lot of factors for that one?
So, before COVID, up until February, actually, you could not apply for an EAD renewal until 90 days prior to expiry. Due to a lot of different factors, they have moved that to 180 days prior to expiry.
Okay. Just going back to the job offer. For a 16-year-old, can you confirm that they do require a job offer in order to apply for an EAD?
If the dependent is 16, no.
So it's 12 to 15
12
years
to
old.
15, 11 months and 30 days. Yes.
Okay. Question, due to the personal information on these applications, what is your protocol for contacting the applicant if there's an error on the form? I assume the form will not be placed in the regular mail and sent back to the applicant?
So I contact the dependent myself through their personal email address. The applications go via FedEx, not regular mail.
It's the same for CDLS Washington. We send everything via FedEx. To OFM, they go via FedEx, and generally there's not a requirement. I mean, unless the documents have to be re-signed. Typically, the other pages can be corrected without having to return the entire return. So it's typically, if we're missing like a copy of a passport or whatever, that can be emailed, so that's not an issue. The only thing that has to be mailed is we need, what they call wet signatures on both the forms that have to be submitted, and that's critical. They will not accept copies.
Right. So, like, if I get an application in, the signature pages are good, I will correct the applications myself, and I won't even contact the dependent at all. I only contact them if there's something I cannot do myself.
There's a question about, I think it was mentioned on a slide, but not necessarily mentioned in the presentation, about dependents who work for the Canadian government. Can you just talk about EADs required, not required for people working specifically for the Canadian government, teleworking from within the United States?
So is there a specific question?
Does this include the political side of government? So somebody who's working in the House of Commons, is that considered the Canadian government?
Mike, do you know?
Is the employee technically considered an employee of the government, the individual considered an employee of the government of Canada, or an employee of a political party? I mean, that would be the issue I think we'd have to determine, but I'm not sure exactly. I need more information.
So that was from Alex Daniel, and I'll ask that person, depending on where they live, if they can reach out to Mike or Misty with the specific details of that question to have that one answered for the spouse. There's a question, is the 14 to 16 week wait for the card, is the wait for the card or for a confirmation letter?
So normally you'll get a confirmation letter about 2 weeks before your EAD arrives in the mail to you. Up until that time, your application is going between 2 government agencies. So I won't know which government agency it's with until you actually receive that letter.
And I should add, everybody's looking for a tracking number once the submission has been sent off. There is no tracking number. The I-797C that you'll get will contain a tracking number, but to be honest, and that, as Misty says, you'll get that just a couple of weeks before you actually receive the card. That tracking number is really of little value. It doesn't help you. It doesn't really tell you exactly when you're going to get your EAD or where it is in the process. It just tells you basically, it just gives you a warm and fuzzy that, you know, USCIS has your EAD. It looks like there's no issues. Your card should be forthcoming. But apart from that, there really isn't a tracking number per se.
There's a question about for a 15-year-old hockey official that cannot get an EAD or social security number until they're 16 and therefore cannot officiate while in the US. Is there a way around this so they don't lose out on the year of development? And it's not a year-round position, so they cannot get a job offer. Is that a unique situation?
So you're talking about a 15-year-old who can officiate hockey games.
Yes.
It's not year-round. If this person could get a letter from whomever, so there's no job offer. It's just if I can find a hockey game to officiate for, then I want to be able to do it. Is that where we're getting?
I don't know what all of the details are. So from Talena Rickert, if you can contact Mike or Misty about your situation and provide those details, then you might be able to get some answers for that one.
I think it's important to talk about the whole issue with respect to 13 to 15-year-olds working, because there was a point in time until very recently where it was certainly my understanding that they could not work because I was getting rejections from OFM and so on. So we went back to OFM just a couple of weeks ago to get clarity, and they came back and said, so long as the individual has a job offer, and technically the job offer should be signed, and I believe it should also be signed by the parents. And in some cases, you also need to have a work permit from the state as well. So it's a bit more complicated than just a job offer. But so in the case of this, the young man who wants to officiate hockey games, I would think the Hockey Association could probably provide something similar to a job offer that could be submitted. I don't think the job offer typically for 13 to 15-year-olds has to be a full-time position. It just has to be a job offer, and we can probably take it from there once we have that. So
right, and depending on the state where the child resides, there are different factors and different things that come into play about if the child can even work at that age and specific hours. And like, I know that my son had to get a letter from his high school giving him permission to work because he was still in high school.
And this applies for volunteer opportunities as well, not just paid work?
In order to get to obtain an EAD?
Yes, for a teenager.
Yes.
Teenage dependent. Yes.
Yes, technically you need an EAD to volunteer. The question though is anybody going to ask for an EAD? It's unlikely that if you're in a volunteer situation that's going to be a significant issue, but the official answer is yes, you need an EAD to volunteer.
Okay. The next question, if a dependent is working remotely for a private Canadian company and on leave until their EAD arrives, can they just return to working once the EAD arrives, or is there anything additional that needs to be done before they return to work?
They need to receive their Social Security card as well. So they need to have both those documents before they work.
And that's a good point, Misty. And they don't come from the same organization, so there's always a time delay. You'll get your EAD first, and then you get your Social Security number, a couple of weeks later, or vice versa. They don't typically come at the same time. Some people that coincidentally that's happened, but you definitely need both.
I'm just looking through the chat. I don't see any additional questions in the chat right now.
I should mention that someone highlighted the fact that the Canadians stationed at NATO ACT in Norfolk, they're even though they're supported by CLS Washington, their EADs are actually processed by the NATO headquarters. There's a U.S. office that does that. They don't come through me, so just a point of clarity.
Thank you. Another question. So someone says they thought that they did not need an EAD for working remotely in Canada as of March 3rd, 2020.
So that's a year ago when I asked the question of OFM, the response I got was no. If you're a Canadian living in the States, working remotely, you do not need EAD. 6 months ago, the question was asked once again based on something else, and the answer came back this time. If you're working for the government of Canada, as Misty said, you do not need EAD, but if you're working for a Canadian company that's based in Canada, you require an EAD. And that's the official response now. So yes, if you're working remotely for a Canadian company, you require an EAD.
Someone is asking to confirm the date which the submission changed from 3 months to 6 months, and how is that communicated?
So that date officially changed on the 24th of February. And it was not, I don't know about Mike, but I didn't receive an email that said, hey, we've changed the date from 3 months to 6 months. It was listed on a document on the Office of Foreign Missions website under notices.
That's correct.
So unless you actually went to that webpage and went to the notice section and looked it up specifically, that's how you would find it.
And of course, this is a very positive change for sure. I mean, going from 90 days, which was really quite unreasonable given how long it takes to get an EAD approved, to 6 months means there's plenty of leeway now to do what you have to do to get the renewal done. So I have a handout that I submit to, or that I send to people who we support, and it includes the new 180-day timeline.
Next question, is it legal to volunteer, no pay involved, without an EAD or SSN?
No, you need an EAD and an SSN to volunteer, regardless of pay.
Question, where can we find the EAD renewal package so they can confirm or audit their taxes to make sure they meet the requirements?
Can you be a little more specific?
There isn't an EAD renewal package. It's basically an application for an EAD. You have to complete the same forms. It's just that now you have to provide tax transcripts and you have to provide state documents as well. So it's basically the same submission except for the additional documents you require to confirm that you pay taxes.
So are you asking like which form you're supposed to file, meaning tax form like 1040 or 1040-NR?
You were just mentioning that there's been some issues with tax, like people not filing their taxes correctly or applications getting sent back. So I just want to make sure like everything's good to go so I don't run into that issue when renewal time comes along.
Right. So on one of the slides, it's very specific on how you, what you need and how to get it.
That's great. I'll look for that when we get the slides. Thank you.
I'm not seeing any other questions right now. I will say that the slides that Misty has presented ideally are printed out and used as a booklet. Follow it slide by slide very precisely, and it will get you through the entire process without missing everything. And all of the tax questions that have been asked will be answered if they print out everything and go through form by form.
The EAD application process, while looks intimidating, it really isn't. It's not that difficult. The frustrating part is waiting for the EAD to be issued. Getting all the forms and stuff together, it doesn't take a whole bunch of time. Filling out the two key documents, the 765 and the 566 forms are reasonably easy. So don't worry about that aspect of it. It's just really what's the frustrating part here is not the submission of the EAD. It's just waiting for the card to be issued.
It's a question about timelines. Is the CAF considering granting 5-year postings for OutCan to alleviate multiple renewals should a member receive an extension? I'm going to throw this one to the CO, if you don't mind, because I don't think this is an EAD question. This is a posting and...
It is an EAD question, actually.
I just wanted to, it wouldn't matter if the CAF issued you a 10-year posting. EADs are only valid for 3 years.
Correct.
And then you have to renew.
And the renewal is only based on the duration of your posting. So your initial EAD, if you're here for 4 years, for example, you get a 3-year EAD. And then, given that you've got 1 year left in your posting, I think the new EAD will only be good for 1 year. So there's always going to be a requirement to renew. It doesn't matter how long your posting is.
But I think the question is asking, will military members be posted to facilitate EAD for dependents, whereas instead of
no. So the answer there is really easy. It's no, because we don't. That's actually backwards. So we don't post people because of trying to make EAD simpler. If people want to extend beyond their current posting, that's fine, and there's a process for that. But they need to account for and expect complications, potential complications with things like EAD renewals as part of their deliberation whether they want to extend or not. But the military posts people to NORAD for operational reasons. I'm not sure what CDLS Washington parameters are for postings, but it's certainly not to accommodate EAD applications.
This is Lieutenant Colonel McClure, the CEO of CDLS Washington. So we're in the same page as Apollo, Lieutenant Colonel Edmund Lau there. So our mission is Canadian Armed Forces centric. So we base our requirements on the CAF needs, and then we try to make it easier for the spouses. So with this EADs, just for awareness for everybody as well, being at the embassy, I contacted my counterparts with the actual Government of Canada workers, and they follow the exact same process and undergo the exact same timings. They wait the same amount of time and they still can't get any hasteners. So follow the details extremely closely, and Misty and Mike are here to help guide us and get us on track. Thank you.
And for everybody, this is Colonel Trombley speaking. It's very, a typical posting for officers is 3 years OTCAN, and for NCM, most of them now get 4 years, when they are posted OTCAN. And this is really guided by VCDS, OutCord, and this is as part of the, successful planning, and there's a lot of factors in play. So to come back to the CEO's comment earlier, we cannot think about this backwards. So it's really, what's the military requirement? Who do we need into the position? And then after that, we provide the best support we can to the family of the member to make this transition as smooth as possible. And again, in terms of extension, not that I want to, talk about that in length, but, we just sent a call-out message for extension. And although this is quite appealing for a few members, there's other factors to consider, second, order of effect and third order of effect, and the EAD and other, requirements for the family and their needs have to be really thought through. So that was just a comment I wanted to add to the discussion.
So, and some of the complications are visa renewals, passport renewals, those things that are associated with going beyond the original tour end date. So I think in the past, people have been applying for extensions without necessarily thinking those through, like EADs, passport and visa renewals. But we're really emphasizing this now because we're running into a very emotional topic where people will actually lose jobs and employment and income because they have we have no control over the process of getting EADs renewed. So those are very real world issues, and we certainly empathize with folks going through that. It's part of the whole consideration when you talk about renewals.
On the topic of renewals, there is a comment that I just want to highlight to everybody. A tip to keep your paperwork in case you get posted back to the United States again, because if you come back, you won't be applying for a new EAD. It is a renewal, even if you've gone back to Canada or come back again. And keeping your paperwork will make the process easier. I'm just looking through the chat to see if there's any questions or comments that I've missed, but I'm not seeing anything right now. If somebody has a question they want to add or put their hand up, feel free to do so.
Hi, Major Kaprowski, it's Lieutenant Colonel Ed Malau. Could I ask Misty and Mike to maybe comment on folks reaching out to OFM, Department of State, CIS directly versus going through you? Because I know that you get your fingers smacked if you have folks that reach out directly. Can you comment on that?
So the Office of Foreign Missions, they request that we contact them directly, vice the dependents, because they are getting so many emails on a daily basis, and it is impossible for them to answer each one of them, and it just delays the process. So that's just how they are asking us to do it.
I agree. I would prefer not to have dependent contact OFM or USCIS directly. I just think it just clouds the issue. It often makes Canada look bad, to be honest. We look disorganized and unprofessional. So it's best to just, go through Misty or go through me, and we'll liaise with OFM. I don't have any communication with USCIS. My only sole point of contact is OFM. And so OFM, if there's an issue, for example, if it's beyond 14 weeks, then they will reach out to USCIS and get back to me with a response. So OFM is my point of contact, and people should deal directly with me.
And I want to say that I know that dependents are going online and they're looking at, OFM's website, and they're reading all of these things. And then sometimes they come back and they say, well, you said this to me, but this website says this is something completely different. And sometimes that is true. Sometimes it will state one thing, and then Mike and I are told something completely different by the Office of Foreign Missions. So just let us know if there's something that you see that we don't see, and maybe we can, help clarify.
Also, it's important to stress that you're a non-immigrant, in terms of your visa status. So the application for others in the U.S. is different. They have different timelines, probably different, maybe even different documentation. So you can't always compare yourself to the general EAD application process. Yours is very particular because you're here temporarily. I'm a former Canadian Forces member, and when I retired, my wife is American. I applied for green card, I got an EAD, and so on. So my process was different than what your process is. So, it's important to be aware of that.
Someone is asking, can you confirm that we are not entitled to collect employment insurance until we receive an EAD?
I cannot confirm nor deny that. I really don't know.
The information we have is that you need to have an EAD so that Services in Canada knows that you're trying to get a job. So I can't speak for Services Canada, I can't speak for the Unemployment Commission, but the information we have is you need an EAD to apply for a UI.
And this question goes back to the discussion about members contacting versus Mike and Misty. Is someone able to check on EAD status after the 14 weeks if you're on vacation?
For CFSU, no.
So everything will be verified and checked once you get back.
Well, we typically, yes. if we're going on vacation, it's not going to be for very long anyway. It's a matter of, we don't typically get a response back right away because OFM, as I mentioned earlier, has to reach out. So when we submit the email, we may get a response about a week or so, 10 days later, telling us the status. And remember, it's difficult to get anything out of OFM at this point because they're dealing with COVID the same way everybody else is, minimum manning, a lot of people working from home. That's why it's taking at least 14 weeks for EADs to be issued. So everything is slower now than it was, even today versus a year ago. We haven't seen a significant improvement in timelines, to be honest.
And due to a multitude of different reasons, there is no backup for me. I don't know, Mike, do you have a backup or is it just you?
It's just me.
Okay.
Just talking about timelines, for those on the line who might not, I guess, appreciate where the application goes, and this is something that I learned, and there might be some on this meeting who don't fully understand it. When you apply for your EAD, it goes from Misty or Mike to the Office of Foreign Missions, and that's where it says it takes 12 to 14 weeks for processing. That's 12 to 14 weeks of processing to get your application over to the Office of Foreign Missions. That's not to get your EAD card. So once it goes from the Office of Foreign Missions for 12 to 14 weeks, then it goes over to the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service, USCIS, and that takes another 2 to 3 weeks or longer before you actually get your card. So I know that was news for me that there's that extra office involved in there and extra timeline. So that 14 weeks could potentially only get you to the next stage in the process, not actually getting your EAD in hand.
What we've been seeing is about 14 weeks has been the entire timeline from once we send it to OFM, and then OFM reaches out to you. They submit the application to USC at one point once they confirm everything's good to go. So typically it's 14 weeks from the time the application gets to OFM to around the time the applicant gets the EAD card. Social Security number, sometime around 14, 16, 17 weeks, but it's about that. So, so that's really the combined processing time involving both U.S. government departments.
So question, if somebody loses their job due to overlap in the renewal process, are they able to claim unemployment during this time?
No
I do
idea.
not have an answer to that question.
It's really not an issue for us, to be honest.
I think you would probably need to call
Employment Canada.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Are there any other comments or questions that people want to bring up?
Hey, Misty and Mike, it's Lieutenant Colonel Ed Malau. I really want to thank you for taking the time. I know that you spent quite a bit of time reviewing the presentation, making sure the package was accurate and up to date. And I appreciate the time that you've taken to address the folks that have logged on. As mentioned at the outset, this is being recorded, so we'll make sure that it gets posted online and send out the links to folks so that they can view it at their leisure. Also, this doesn't preclude anybody from reaching out to Mike and Misty with any specific questions for their specific situations. As the CEO for the last couple of years, I know that it's a very emotional topic and it seems to come up after every APS cycle. I know Misty and I were dealing with this back in 2019 when I first arrived. It seemed to have resolved itself, and then during the pandemic, that just threw everything for a loop, and now we're back talking about EADs because we know that it's emotional and we know that it's financial too. We know that it impacts people's household finances when potentially their spouse or dependents are losing employment because of delays in the EAD renewal or application process. We have no control over that, and I think one of the key messages from the leadership is that we're trying to do everything we can with the tools that we have, but we really are limited with what we can influence. So back in 2019, I know that General Coates was willing to engage the POLAD and try and get Major General Ormsby as the CDA to reach out to the Department of State. But before that happened, the delays in processing corrected itself. So now that we're in and still in a pandemic, it's actually gotten worse, and the delays have gotten worse. And so that's why we're telling everybody to do what we can, which is the application process, to try and speed up or at least cut down on the time spent if it's getting rejected. So that's the stuff we can control. I know that there's still work with the POLAD. I know that the Chief of Staff has engaged with the POLAD, so I'll throw it to him.
Yes, thank you, Apollo. So yeah, just for your essay, like we recognize that there's some cases that are, more sensitive just because a spouse may lose, for example, his or her license to work. So in those cases, please bring this through your chain of command. And what we can try to do, it's really push this file through the US POLAD. I had a chat with her last week, and we have to understand that they have different priorities, such as the current operation in Afghanistan to repart, American citizen over here. But that being said, she said that if we have, a few cases that we can highlight to her, she will contact her counterpart in Washington and see what can be done. But again, I really want to manage expectation, because she also mentioned that, well, first of all, she needs to find a human being. What she meant by that is that often she will reach out to them and she will not get a response. And she's the US POLAD, political advisor. So I just want to put that into perspective. But that being said, she understands our reality. She's the advisor to the Commander, General Van Herk, and she's willing to help us out as much as she can, and at least try to facilitate, some requests when we are there and when we have really used all the different tools that are available to us. But again, this is a last result. This is something we need as an organization to use thoughtfully. But, I will ask Apollo to actually, close it up with the CEOs. And if there are some cases right now that are considered very time sensitive and high priority, that we'll try to push that through the POLAD channel. Again, this is something that we will try. Are we going to get results? I do not know. Even the POLAD couldn't confirm that to me, but it's worth a shot. So this is further information for USA.
All right, thanks, sir. Anything else from anybody out there? Okay. Thank you very much again for logging on and joining us for this town hall. We'll do a scrub afterwards. And again, I invite you to contact Misty and Mike should you have anything specific. So thanks very much again, Misty, Mike. We appreciate the time you've taken to help us navigate a very complicated process. So this is us logging off. Thank you.